It was a day that shattered the illusion of security. October 7th, 2023. The sun rose like any other day, but by the time it set, the world had changed for Israel. A date forever seared into Israel's memory. The nation was plunged into mourning, with flags at half-mast and memorial services held across the country. Hamas, the militant group, launched a surprise attack. It was a meticulously planned assault, catching everyone off guard. Rockets rained down on Israeli towns. The sky was lit up with explosions, and the sound of sirens filled the air. Gunmen stormed across the border. Terror gripped the nation. People ran for cover, unsure of where to find safety. The world watched in horror as images of the carnage emerged. News channels broadcasted the unfolding tragedy, and the international community reacted with shock and condemnation. Hundreds of Israelis, civilians going about their daily lives, lay dead. The streets were strewn with the aftermath of violence, a grim testament to the day's events. But the nightmare was far from over. Hamas had taken hostages, families were torn apart, and the fear of the unknown loomed large. Ordinary people snatched from their homes, their families left in agonizing uncertainty. The sense of helplessness was palpable. Amidst the chaos, one question echoed: how could this happen? How could such a breach occur in a nation known for its vigilance? How could a nation renowned for its intelligence and military might be caught so off guard? The questions were endless, and the answers elusive. The attack exposed a vulnerability, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of invincibility. Analysts and experts debated the implications on news channels, and as the dust settled, the nation looked to its leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, for answers. His words would be scrutinized, his actions judged. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a long and agonizing ordeal. The conflict would continue, and the nation's resilience would be tested. The hostages' fate would become entangled in a web of politics, war, and a humanitarian crisis of unimaginable proportions. The road ahead was uncertain, and the nation's spirit would be challenged like never before. Netanyahu, the seasoned politician, known for his unwavering stance and fiery rhetoric, the self-proclaimed protector of Israel, stood before the nation with a steely resolve, vowed swift and decisive action. "We will hunt them down," he declared, his voice laced with fury. And so began the retaliation. The Israeli military, the IDF, unleashed its might on Gaza. Airstrikes pounded the densely populated strip, turning night into day with their relentless bombardment. The world watched, a mixture of condemnation and concern. This was not a surgical strike, this was a full-blown war. The death toll mounted with each passing day, the numbers climbing higher and higher. The Iron Dome, Israel's vaunted missile defense system, intercepted many rockets, but not all. Fear and uncertainty gripped both sides of the conflict. Meanwhile, the hostages remained trapped, their fate uncertain. Their faces, plastered on posters and news channels, became symbols of the conflict's human cost. Parents clung to hope, their voices hoarse from pleading for their children's return. But as weeks turned into months, a chilling realization dawned. This was not a simple rescue mission. Netanyahu's promise of swift justice seemed increasingly hollow. The hostages were pawns in a larger game, their lives hanging in the balance as the war raged on. The iron wall, once thought impenetrable, was crumbling under the weight of its own promises and the harsh realities of war. The war dragged on, seemingly without end, engulfing everything in its path. It was a relentless cycle of violence and despair, leaving no one untouched. Gaza, already impoverished and struggling, was reduced to rubble and ash. Hospitals overflowed with the injured, their resources stretched to the breaking point. Schools, once sanctuaries of learning and growth, became makeshift shelters for the displaced. The humanitarian crisis escalated with each passing day, as aid workers struggled to meet the growing needs. International pressure mounted on both sides to agree to a ceasefire, but peace seemed elusive. In July 2024, a glimmer of hope emerged, a potential end to the suffering. Egypt, a key mediator in the region, announced a proposed deal that could change everything. It included a phased release of hostages, a crucial step towards peace. It seemed like a lifeline, a chance to stop the bloodshed and begin healing. But Netanyahu, facing immense pressure from his right-wing coalition partners, rejected the deal outright. The decision sent shockwaves through Israel and beyond, leaving many in disbelief. Was he prioritizing political survival over the lives of his citizens? The debate raged on. The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered and unsettling. The war raged on, claiming more lives, deepening the divide, and pushing the hostages further into the abyss, with no end in sight. The rejection of the ceasefire deal cast a long shadow over Netanyahu's leadership. Whispers of dissent grew louder. Then in October 2024, a bombshell dropped. Yoav Gallant, the recently dismissed defense minister, spoke out. He accused Netanyahu of putting politics before the lives of the hostages. Gallant claimed that the IDF had achieved its military objectives. The war, he argued, was no longer about security, it was about Netanyahu clinging to power. The accusation struck a chord with the Israeli public. Protests erupted, demanding Netanyahu's resignation. The nation, once united in grief and anger, was now fractured. Netanyahu dismissed Gallant's claims as absurd. He insisted that he was fighting for the release of every hostage. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been sown. The man who had once embodied strength and resolve was now seen as indecisive and untrustworthy. Section 5. A glimmer of hope. As 2024 drew to a close, the war seemed intractable. The body count continued to rise. The hostages' families clung to hope, their grief compounded by the agonizing uncertainty. Then, in January 2025, a breakthrough. After 15 long months, a ceasefire agreement was reached. The agreement, brokered by the US and Qatar, included a phased release of hostages and Palestinian prisoners. It was a fragile peace, cobbled together under immense international pressure. The far-right factions within Netanyahu's coalition were furious. They demanded the resumption of the war, accusing Netanyahu of capitulating to terrorists. But for the families of the hostages, it was a moment of bittersweet relief. Finally, after months of anguish, they dared to dream of being reunited with their loved ones. Section 6. The Weight of Silence. The first group of hostages returned home in January 2025. The images beamed around the world were both joyous and heartbreaking. Families embraced, tears streaming down their faces, a mix of relief and overwhelming emotion. But for every story of reunion, there were countless others still shrouded in silence. Over the next few weeks, more hostages were released. Each homecoming was a cause for celebration, a reminder of the human cost of the conflict. But the shadow of those still missing loomed large. Hamas remained tight-lipped about their fate. The families of the missing were left in a cruel limbo, their hopes dwindling with each passing day. The weight of their silence was almost unbearable. Section 7. A nation divided. The ceasefire held, but the war's scars ran deep. Israel was a nation divided. The far right, emboldened by the conflict, stepped up their rhetoric, calling for a return to violence. The peace, they argued, was a sham. They accused Netanyahu of betrayal. On the other side, many Israelis questioned the war's cost. Was it worth the human toll? The devastation in Gaza, the erosion of Israel's international standing? Netanyahu, once a towering figure, found himself increasingly isolated. The war had exposed deep divisions within Israeli society, divisions that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the nation. Section 8. The world reacts. The international community, while relieved by the ceasefire, remained deeply critical of Israel's conduct during the war. The high civilian death toll in Gaza, the destruction of infrastructure, and the humanitarian crisis sparked widespread condemnation. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, launched an investigation into alleged war crimes committed by both sides. Netanyahu and Gallant were among those facing potential arrest warrants. The ICC's involvement further strained Israel's relationship with the international community. The war had tarnished Israel's image, leaving it more isolated than ever before. The question of accountability hung heavy in the air. Section 9. The Unanswered Questions. As the dust settled on the ruins of war, many questions remained unanswered. Why did Netanyahu reject the July 2024 ceasefire deal? Was it a miscalculation, a gamble that backfired? Or was it a cold, calculated decision prioritizing political survival over the lives of his citizens? The war had exacted a heavy toll on both sides, thousands dead, countless lives shattered, a region plunged further into chaos and despair. And for what? Had Israel achieved its objectives? Or had it simply sown the seeds for the next conflict? The answers, like the fate of the remaining hostages, remained elusive. The war, it seemed, was over. But the true cost of Netanyahu's choices would continue to reverberate for years to come.